What's going on, guys? Moralltach Monthly 44 has just wrapped up last evening, and as always, I want to take a look at what decks actually entered this event, what decks managed to top, see if there was any cool new tech cards starting to pop up, any trends or anything like that, and just talk about the event as a whole. You guys really enjoy when I make these videos, and I've kind of been more so focusing on the larger event, which is going to be the Moralltach Monthlies, rather than talking about some of the potentially smaller events that take place in the Hat Alliance Discord server, which, speaking of which, this tournament and many others that are held throughout every single month do take place for free for the most part in the Hat Alliance Discord server. So if you're interested in playing in some online Hat format tournaments, I definitely suggest checking it out. I will have that server linked in the video description. There's over 3,000 members just trying to talk about Hat format and play Hat format and just enjoy the format. But anyways, guys, let's start talking about this event. So for this event, Moralltach Monthly 44, there was 61 players, which is actually slightly down from what it had been averaging for quite some time. For a while, it was hitting, the 70 plus range. Of course, like months and months back, it was closer to the 50-ish range. So while it is still technically up in the number of players, it's kind of down from the last few months. I'm not entirely sure if there's a specific reason for it. I know right now in the Hat Alliance Discord server, there's like 5 different online Hat formats tournaments taking place. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, or the fact that Genesis format has been taking off more and more, and people are kind of shifting focus, or maybe it's because it's the end of the year almost, and the holidays and just all the craziness that happens with the end of the year. Maybe people are just more busy and stuff like that. I'm not entirely sure, but still 61 players is definitely not bad at all. And as always, just looking at this graph here, we see tons and tons of diversity. But already, before I even check out what decks are on here, something I'm noticing is there is an overwhelming bigger chunk here compared to usually the two biggest chunks are like 50-50 or pretty close. So it looks like there were 13 players that came with different artifact Traptrix variants. Now, usually this is broken up a little more in depth when we actually look at the decks, but this could be, Hat, Cat, Chat, like so many different artifact Traptrix variants. But seeing that 13 people brought it is definitely a bit of a surprise. And after that, we see 5 Spellbook, which is actually pretty decent for the amount of players that were there, as well as 5 Geargia. So Geargia actually tying with Spellbook this time, whereas for a while I feel like we saw Spellbook die down a bit. Same with things like Bujin, for example, and usually Geargia is the other bigger slice, so kind of surprising there. After that, we see 4 Mermail, 4 Infernity, so, more people are trying to bring Infernity. I always have to say this because people enjoy this deck so much, but, it did die down for a while, but here we see it is, coming back into the format a bit more, and more people are willing to play it. After that, we see 2 Evil Swarm, 2 Geargia Hieratic, another fan favorite deck. After that, 2 Sylvan, 2 Mythic Ruler, 2 Hieratic Ruler, so we actually had a good, even spread of the different ruler decks here, or the main 2. Obviously, there's also like Lightsworn Ruler and stuff like that. After that, we see 1 Inzektor Artifact, something you don't really see that often, 1 Fire Fist, 1 Fire King, 1 Noble Knight, 1 Lightsworn Ruler, so, 1 less player for the other ruler deck in the format. 1 Gigavise Sylvan, which is a really interesting deck. This is another one that you don't really see very often. It basically kind of plays like Gigavise, but with a Sylvan engine to turbo through itself a little faster. Definitely a interesting thing there. After that, we see 1 6 Samurai, so lots of different decks that we aren't used to seeing on a month-to-month basis were popping up in this event, which I think is really cool, especially given since there was a lower amount of players. Technically, you would have expected probably less diversity, but here we are seeing so many new decks already popping up. After that, 1 Madolche, 1 Koikimiru, 1 Bujin. So, okay, there was a Bujin player. Again, it's kind of weird. This deck was dominating so much and then it just sort of died down. I guess people just got bored of it, kind of, since it does somewhat have a linear gameplay. People always referred to this deck as like the helmet deck of the format, so maybe that's the reason, or just, people want to test around with other things. Again, we see so many different decks here. After that one Dustin, I don't remember at this point if I have posted that replay review yet, but if I haven't, be on the lookout for that. I actually do have some gameplay from that. It is a very funny, cool deck. After that, one Constellar, one rank 4 toolbox. This is another thing. There's so many different versions of the rank 4 toolbox, usually just, playing things like Kagado Kage and just other things to spam out rank 4s. There are so many different versions of this deck, and I definitely plan to show a few off in different replay reviews. I can already think of like 3 or 4 different matches for different versions of a rank 4 toolbox that I plan to show off that I already have recorded, so be on the lookout for that. After that, we see one Firefist Traptrix, one Chainburn, one Harpy Artifact, one Gadget, one Heraldic Beast, one Artifact Thunder, another deck that was super popular, and it feels like people have slowly started bringing it a little less lately. And lastly, one Battling Boxer. So overall, just very interesting amount of different decks here. Yeah, no, it just like some of these decks are really cool to see here, like Inzektor Artifact. Again, like Gigavise Sylvan is something you don't see very often. Dustin, lots of interesting stuff happening right now, and it feels like people more and more are wanting to experiment, and personally, I'm a really big fan of that. Now, moving on into the top 9, I guess, we had 2 Artifact Traptrix, so despite there being so many players that entered with Artifact Traptrix, it seems only 2 managed to take top spots, which evened out with 2 Geargia. So actually, Geargia had a very good conversion rate. 5 entered and 2 were able to actually top versus, the 13 Artifact Traptrix and only 2 topping. So very impressive there. And also, it feels like it's like very often on with Geargia actually going and topping. Sometimes you don't see it at all. Other times it takes up a majority. So very cool there. After that, we see one Mermail, one Bujin. Oh, so the one Bujin player actually did manage to top this. One Mythic Ruler, one Infernity. I know people will be real excited to see that. And lastly, the Noble Knight player. I already know who this is because they have sent me replays and stuff. And always great to see that, this player is doing so well and really pushing this deck. It's very powerful, and it feels like more and more they've been exploring this deck and really perfecting it, so I am very excited to go and actually take a look at their list. But now that we have seen this top cut, let's actually see what placings those decks got and the players that managed to top with them. So in first place was actually Mermail. Taking down this whole event was Devi Morhan. We have seen them top before at some other hat format online events, so we already knew this is a very good player, and I've seen a lot of their replays, not necessarily from this event, though I think I might have 1 or 2 already recorded, but in general, some of the most technical Mermail gameplay I've seen in a long time, so it will be very cool to see their list. If I remember correctly from the last time I took a look at their build, I remember them not playing Moulin Glacier, I believe, so it'll be interesting to see if that's changed up at all. In second place, we are looking at Bujin. So again, Bujin, despite only 1 entering and 1 topping, they actually almost made it and finished the whole tournament out, which is very impressive. Falco is a great player. We've definitely seen them in the top cut as well. Continuing the trend, actually, now that I look at a lot of these names, we actually have seen just like most of these names before, and the hat format is a very rewarding format for people that take the time to actually learn the skills of it and the technical gameplay. So very impressive. Congrats to all these players. But let's keep moving on. We have Icaros, who played Artifact Traptrix. I believe this one specifically was C.H.A.T, so the card car hand Artifact Traptrix deck that has definitely been popping up a lot more and has been a lot more popular than, say, the cat builds or the hat builds, kind of getting the best of both worlds there. After that, we have Jay on Mythic Ruler. I believe this was actually the Mythic Ruler hands deck that more people have been messing with, and so also just a really cool, interesting deck that has kind of started evolving more and more over time. After that, we have Whisk, who is going to be on Geargia. If I remember from their previous tops, I want to say there's a good chance this is going to be like a more pure version versus Ghost Rider, who also usually tops these events when they do with Geargia Traptrix. So again, this one's probably going to be pure. This one is probably going to be the Traptrix version, if I had to guess. After that, we have Kyle YGO94, who is on Infernity, so a different name on Infernity. Usually we'll see like Dunko Seka or something playing Infernity, but this time we do have a different player, so it'll be very interesting to see how their list compares to, say, the other list that we've seen in the past. After that, we have Floatstone Mafia. I believe they were also on C.H.A.T, so, very similar to Icaros there. We'll see how these builds actually compare to one another. And lastly, as mentioned, we had Ultra, who was playing Noble Knight, just really grinding with this deck, and I know a lot of people will be excited to see their list. So again, congrats to all these players. Now let's actually go and take a look at all these lists. I'm not going to try to make this as long as sometimes these videos end up being. I'm just going to talk about the very noticeable differences or things that don't come off as standard as usual. So anyways, guys, let's get straight into it. So starting off, we do have the first place Mermail list, and at a quick glance, there's only a couple things that really stand out right away. The first of which is, as I had mentioned previously, I don't see Moulin Glacia in this build at all, very similar to how I mentioned previously. And after that, I do see that they are choosing to play the copy of Turge, as some builds don't necessarily play it while others do, as well as they're choosing to play Abyss Osha, which is also just a really neat card. Very similar to, I believe it's Abyss Dine, that from time to time you will just randomly see pop up in a Mermail build. That is something very cool. You can make some really cool combos with it by basically getting rid of, like, say a level 7 or something, and then eventually being able to kind of get into a rank 4 as well as a rank 3. I remember back in the day it was like make Bahamut Shark plus Mechwhip Engineer, and then the Bahamut would summon a copy of Abyss Strite. So we see that that is probably something they were trying to do here. Another thing is they are on double Megalo versus, say, the Megalo and Lead, so choosing to just go with 2 copies of Megalo. Very strong card. You do kind of lose out on the fact that you don't have the slightly bigger beater, but at the same time, just being able to get early Megalo access and being able to search your copy of Sphere is definitely something interesting and neat. Other than that, again, we have been seeing the Aqua Spirits pop up a little more. They are on the 3 Undyne and 2 Controller, so very standard. But the other thing that is kind of standing out to me is main decking 1 copy of Chalice and 1 copy of Lance. I can't really even think why they chose this sort of ratio, but I think that's always fun. I really like seeing random one-ofs and stuff in these types of decks. Moving on to the side deck, we see that they are completely maxing out on their hand traps of 3 Maxi and 3 Crow in the side. Most of the time, if a deck isn't maining these, which I feel like in Mermail, usually if they are going to main a hand trap, it's going to be Maxi. But here we see that they are just siding them, as well as your basic 3 copies of MST, as usually this deck does, want the little extra push into some of those back row decks. The other thing, though, is it looks like they're only playing 1 copy of Malcat. I feel like usually Mermail decks will tend to kind of try to play as much back row removal for first or second as possible, but here we see slightly less of it, and as well 2 copies of Vanity's Emptiness, which we have seen pop up in some builds playing like 1 in the main or 1 in the side. Specifically for a lot of IRL events, you see that a little bit more, but here we see that they are choosing to side them. In terms of the extra deck, it all looks very standard. They aren't playing the copy of Gungnir, and instead it looks like they are choosing to play the copy of Tri-Edge Levia instead, which usually, you know, a lot of builds will either go with the Trite or the Levia. Sometimes they won't even play the Levia, but given they are playing Osha, it means they probably are going into that Bahamut line a little more, as mentioned, and then it means that this is going to be live a bit more often, and just such a powerful card. Being able to banish cards that, or I believe it's banish or shuffle back into deck, cards that it battles is a very good way to just out hands and other problematic cards. But overall, very cool build, and let's get on to the next list. Next up, we have the Bujin list, and already there's a couple things that stand out to me as kind of funny. Well, I guess not necessarily funny. I see one thing kind of in the extra deck that is a little, well, a few things in the extra deck that look a little funny that I'll talk about here in just a second. But notable things in the main deck is they are choosing to play the one copy of Bear. I think this is really good just to have basically an extra card that you can search off of Tenki, as well as a card that just into certain matchups, if you're able to connect with this and get your copy of Tenki, and then get into, say, your Yamatos or Harumes or whatever piece you're kind of missing, is a very, very strong. Being able to, you know, have a Tenki search the copy of Bear, summon Bear, get rid of the Tenki, and out, say, like a set armor or something is extremely strong. The other thing is they are choosing 2 Harume and 1 Mikazuchi versus the vice versa that we see a lot of times. The other thing is they are playing your 2 copies of Maxi and 1 copy of Crow. Usually I want to say that Bujin a lot of times will just play 3 total, so like 3 Maxi or 3 Crow, but going with 2 and 1 kind of reminds me how some Geargia builds for a little while were also doing kind of that weird ratio, like a mixed play set in a sense. The other thing that I'm kind of seeing as I look at their side deck kind of briefly is they are choosing to side the copy of Quillen rather than maining it, so that is something that I feel like we haven't seen in a while. Also, funny enough, 1 copy of BLS is super random in this deck. No one expects the Bujin player to drop BLS. I sure wouldn't, but seeing that there's, you know, siding 2 other copies of Crow, I guess the idea is basically to drop a Crow, have some Bujins in graveyard, and then drop BLS to just steal games, which is so funny, and like it's very funny to see that actually. As well as here we do see the 3rd copy of Maxi, which is very good to see. The other thing is choosing 1 copy of Trap Stun in the main. They definitely were not wanting to deal with back row here, already maining the 3 copies of MST, which some Bujin decks choose to rather side the MSTs rather than maining them. Here we do see them in the main still with the 2 copies of Lance, so really trying to work their way around that back row. And again, with how many artifact Traptrix were in this event, it's definitely understandable. And yeah, Trap Stun just being able to blank all the opponent's back row for a turn is very strong. Everything else in the side deck looks pretty much what you'd expect, minus those couple things that I mentioned. Maybe like the Torrential and Compulse being in the side means that maybe in certain matchups you get rid of, you know, maybe like a Trap Stun if need be, or maybe MSTs depending on the matchups, and you can just put in more real traps and stuff. And so going into the extra deck, you like never see the copy of Zero Fine in a Bujin extra deck. I'm guessing you're just using this if you happen to find your way into double copies of Crane on board, because I'm pretty sure this just needs Wing Beast, and it is a very strong card and it's really cool to see, but definitely very unexpected. Similarly, in terms of unexpected, seeing that they are playing the Gaia Dragon and the M7 is super gimmicky, though I guess it makes sense given they are playing the Omega to be able to slap on top of it the copy of M7. But I guess the other benefit that these have is if you mind control, say, your opponent's copy of Pleiades or any other rank 5, you can just slap the Gaia Dragon on top of it, or for Pleiades, for example, you can slap the copy of M7 on top of it and just kind of have a beater. So that is something like very funny and cool to see, and overall a very interesting list. So let's go on to the next one. Next up, we do have the chat list, and this feels very standard. I feel like usually the chat deck usually does play like 2 copies of card rather than like maxing out on 3, and that's partially because they are, you know, fitting so much into it, already playing the hands as well as like 5 artifacts in this case, choosing to side the Scythe rather than maining it, as well as, playing the normal ratios for Traptrix monsters, as well as they are choosing to play 2 copies of Max C, which definitely isn't bad. It's kind of interesting now that I'm thinking about it to see more of the hand traps in the main deck, how I mentioned, I believe, with the Mermail list, how a lot of players were siding them for a long time. We are starting to get back into that era of people actually wanting to go and main them. This might be because we have been seeing a little more combo decks popping up lately. We saw a lot of Sylvan topping at one point. We've been slowly seeing Infernity coming back into the mix, and I guess people just want to be slightly more prepared in the main for that. But other than that, I mean, it looks overall like a pretty standard build. I guess one thing to note is the Void Trap hole here, but other than that, the main deck looks very solid. In terms of the side deck, nothing is really standing out in terms of anything there either, or even the extra deck, like maybe choosing to go with like the double 101, but again, that's not super unheard of, and nothing else really standing out. They are playing the Gaia Dragon Volcasaurus, and yeah, they do have Dweller, so yeah, no, nothing really stands out. A very clean, solid list, and I wouldn't expect any less from Icaros, always playing something very solid, so very cool to see that. And let's just go on to the next list, which is going to be this Mythic Ruler Hands list. And so what's funny about this deck is sometimes the builds won't play the Mythic Dragons. We always call them like a Mythicless hand ruler deck or something like that, and so here already I am seeing that they are choosing to play the Mythic Dragons, which is very good. I always like having a search target in general for your rulers if they get banished. That's one problem I always had with like Hieratic ruler, that doesn't necessarily always play all the attributes. So if you go and, lose one of your rulers, then you don't really get any sort of advantage off of it. But I do like to see that they actually are doing that. As a result, it looks like they have dropped things like Corseska, for example, and are just kind of minimalizing on the bricks here, since they kind of do have to make room for the hands, but the hands being such good board breakers and kind of cards that can stall out if need be, as well as being attributes for the different rulers, is very nice. The other thing I'm noticing is instead of, some of the ratios we're used to for the spell cards, we are seeing them maxing out on the copies of Cards of Consonance, as well as trade-ins and, Upstart, obviously. So that is something also they are just trying to turbo through their deck. And also, again, another deck just playing the one of Trap Stun as well as Double Emptiness now that I see that. So it seems like the combo decks, or some of the more mid-rangey combo decks almost, given this is, again, playing the hands and stuff, are on kind of similar wavelengths in terms of their thinking here. Just the one Trap Stun, Double Emptiness, as well as, I guess, yeah, even the Torrential in the side is something that is kind of falling suit with some of these lists. The other thing here, we're seeing the 3 Max C in the side, as well as the 2 copies of DD Crow. Triple MST in the side. Again, the combo decks kind of want to make sure they have this somewhere, either in the main or side, and usually Ruler would rather probably side this because they just want more gas and engine. The other thing I'm seeing is they are choosing to side the copy of Giant, or not Giant Grinder. No, it is Giant Grinder. For some reason, I was thinking Giant Trainer for a second, but that is the other rank 8. So they are choosing to side this rather than actually having it in the extra, and it looks like as a result, they're choosing to go double copies of Felgrain, which I guess could definitely make sense given they are still playing the Mythic Rulers, as well as, playing the triple copies of Blue Eyes that this deck has been known to play. So really wanting to kind of maximize that. The other thing I'm noticing here is the copy of Queen Dragon Jin, which is really cool because, by having more level 4s in the deck, you have a higher chance of actually going into something like this, which can bring back like a Blue Eyes or something, and you do just have access to more combo lines. I'm pretty sure this can bring back Blue Eyes. I forget, there is some stipulation with this card. I don't exactly remember what it was off the top of my head, but then in terms of the synchro monsters, all of that looks pretty normal too. I guess the other thing is, besides just not having this in the actual extra deck, they're also choosing not to play like an All-Say or anything like that usually I feel a lot of the ruler decks do play, but I guess given the way that this deck plays slightly different from other Mythic ruler builds, it does sort of make sense. So overall, very cool, and on to the next deck. Next up, we do have pure Geargia, as I expected, and realistically, I feel like Geargia is kind of the most boring deck for me to talk about because there's like very rarely, I should say, any changes that stand out the most. Like even looking at this list, the thing that kind of stands out to me the most when looking at it is just they're playing a little more spells, whereas sometimes Geargia won't play like say the copies of Upstart, or they'll only play like 1 to 2 copies of Soul Charge. But lately I feel like we have been seeing this more, as well as because the deck doesn't play the most monsters, Soul Charge is just a really good card to be able to keep some sort of board presence. Here we also see triple copies of MST, which some builds will play like 2 of, some will play 3, so that's not the craziest thing. And then I guess just the Book of Moon is something that I feel like it died down for a little while, but here we do see it popping up again. In terms of the traps, they are on pretty much the usual stuff, not playing any copies of Wiretap, I guess, is somewhat notable, as usually I want to say that the pure versions will tend to play a little more traps, but here we do see they're playing a little more spells, which could probably be a solid thing given how many different decks have been on like trap stun and stuff in the main, even if it was just like 1 copy. The other thing is they are instead also going with the 1 copy of Needle Sealing, just a good way to deal with combo. Again, how I mentioned before, we have been seeing more and more combo popping up, so that is just a overall good counter. Looking at the side deck, there really isn't anything that stands out to me, and looking at the extra deck, there isn't really anything that stands out to me either. Sometimes the deck will play things like Crazy Box, but even that isn't like a given, so nothing too crazy there. Again, not trying to underplay this person's accomplishment, it just really is, a pretty standard looking list, and it's not bad at all. It does what it needs to, and it's good at it. Now, moving on into the other Geargia list, we are looking at Geargia Traptrix, and this one there is a little bit more to talk about. I guess a quick glance, they are choosing to at least have the wiretaps in the side, so kind of similar to how I said before that the Geargia deck usually will play them. Here we are seeing that, but the other thing that's really standing out to me is, well, first off, how many hand traps are in the main. Geargia usually will play anywhere from like 2 to 4 hand traps in the main. Here we see them playing 6 of them, so really maxing out on kind of that interruption from the hand that is just great against most decks. I guess they always have bad matchups, like you don't really want to have like Max C against Bujin, for example, where Crow would be better, but then there's matchups where like Crow isn't going to necessarily do as much as a Max C would. For example, like against Infernity with the right hand, you'd rather have Max C because it kind of stops them from comboing, and if not, then you're going to just have a ton of cards in hand. So that is something that definitely stands out a lot. The other thing to note is they are also maxing out on 3 copies of Breakthrough Skill and 3 copies of Fiendish Chain. Usually it's like 3 and 2 or 2 and 3, but really just maxing out on it, and it kind of gives a good aesthetic to this list, just seeing so many 3-ofs and just clean looking list, as well as they are choosing to go with double copies of Traptrix Trap-Hole Nightmare, and that's something that I feel like we've seen even some builds play up to 3. I know we've definitely taken a look at like Spellbook lists that have, but really just choosing to go with 2 is something kind of cool and something we haven't seen in a little while. Given they are playing the 3 copies of Mermail, they definitely probably want to have enough targets that it's always live, whereas sometimes you'll be playing like 3 copies of Mermail and just playing a bottomless and 1 copy, and there will be times when you like have a dead Mermail, not dead in terms of you can't summon it or anything, but you don't really gain any advantage off of it. So I do kind of like to see that. Now, looking at the side deck, it's very similar to how I mentioned with the main deck. 3-ofs, we are seeing again 3 copies of MST in the side, so kind of similar how I said with the more pure version that some builds will play like 2, maybe even 3 in the main. We are seeing here instead they're choosing to side it, and I guess also similar to the other list how I said they were playing a lot of spells, this version is kind of showing you what I meant when I said that they are like, usually Geargia doesn't really play that many spells or anything, and we are seeing that here. But yeah, 3 copies of Blackhorn, 3 copies of Debunk, just overall some of your like floodgates that the deck usually plays, as well as your other copy of a whole trap card, just another search target, and against like Geargia Mirrors or just other decks that play at a slightly slower pace, The Acid Trap Hole is always good. And in terms of the extra deck, again, nothing really stands out too much. I feel like when we've looked at their list before, I believe this was, what's their name? Let me go up here. Ghost Rider. I feel like when we've looked at their lists in the past, we have seen the copy of Temtempo, so that doesn't even shock me or anything at this point. And even historically, this card was played quite often. Overall, very good player and a very interesting list, I guess, for a Geargia list. So we love to see it, but let's move on into the next list. Next up, we do have Infernity, and right away, the thing that's standing out to me is just the amount of trap cards. Usually, you'll see anywhere from like 4 to 6 traps in Infernity. A lot of builds will just play the 3 copy of Break and 1 Barrier, but here we do see the 3 copies of Emptiness in the main, so we are starting to see Vanity's Emptiness pop up a little bit more. I keep saying it, but this could just come down to the fact that we are seeing a little more combo, or just in general, this card in certain decks will just slow other decks down enough. Infernity being one of those decks where it does feel justified to play the copies of Emptiness, because there are times where you can just key beat a locket and kind of just win the match off of that. Besides that, the monsters do all look very standard. Even the spells look decently standard. Some builds will choose to go with MST in the main, whereas others will choose to go with the copies of Lance in the main, which here we do see that they are siding triple Lance and triple copies of Chalice, which is definitely needed into, you know, those trap-heavy decks or artifact decks in general, being able to stop things like Scythe or Moralltach that can really hinder your plays. We do see the 1 copy of Rhapsody in Berserk here in the side deck, which we have seen, I believe, people siding the last couple times we have seen Infernity top, as well as the 1 copy of Max C. These seem to be like kind of common trends at this point. The other thing is, again, triple copies of Trap Stun in the side. Not that the other builds were playing triple, but in general, just seeing Trap Stun in the side. And again, it makes sense, even if you want to keep the Emptinesses in, combo off, and then on your turn be able to trap stun, turn them off, keep comboing, and just kind of, you know, win the game off of that is so good. And again, just also being able to blanket your opponent's trap cards and combo in and break their board is also very solid. Infernity being such a rank 4 focused deck, sometimes just trap stunning and exitoning your opponent is enough to win you the game, as well as they are on the triple copies of Street Patrol rather than playing 2, as well as the, you know, the 2 copies of the Lavalval Chain rather than 3. But overall, besides that, the extra deck all looks very solid. People keep bringing up, you know, Infernity playing things like the Black Ship of Corn, and I do think there is a strong consideration for more people to start looking into that, but for the time being, we haven't seen that as much. But overall, a very solid list. So on to the next one, which is again going to be a chat list, and I guess right away, I only see a couple differences. I see that they are on double copies of Traptrix Triple Nightmare, similar to that one Geargia list, versus the other chat list was on 1 copy of Void Trap Hole, so that is one key difference, as well as I remember saying for the other list that they were siding Scythe. Instead, here we do see that they are maining it, and the other change that I'm noticing is, I believe the other list, Icaros's list, was on 2 copies of Call of the Haunted, whereas this one is on 3. It somewhat makes sense to be on more Call of the Haunted if you are on extra copies of artifacts, which this one is on 1 extra copy, so that also makes sense there. But overall, besides that, the main deck looks pretty much the same. In terms of the side deck, they are choosing to go with 2 copies of Mind Crush. We have been seeing this pop up a little bit more, and I really do think this card is good, so I'm very happy to see someone actually going and taking advantage of that. We do see it from time to time, and it's always nice. Other than that, we do also see double copies of Wiretap here, the 1 copy of Nobleman a Crossout, and nothing else really standing out. Even looking at the extra deck, it looks basically the same from what I remember the other chat lists looking like, with, you know, the double copies of Pleiades, double copies of 101, the Volcasaurus and Gaia Dragon, and yeah, no, overall, again, just super solid list, very similar to the other one. Both, I'm wondering if they like worked on it together or anything like that, but in general, very cool to see. And on to the last list for this video. Last up, we do have the Noble Knight list, and right away, there's definitely a lot to unpack here, as we don't really see Noble Knight topping that often, and I would say that there's definitely a lot of similarities to the list that I put out a long time ago, so it makes it at least kind of seem good that, you know, I was on the right pace with how I was building it, but there definitely are a lot of key differences as well, and a lot of cool stuff. We do see triple copies of Valor, which I personally, when I was building this deck for myself, I said that this is a very solid card in this deck specifically, because a lot of the things that will lose you the game is going to be a lot of extra deck cards, or just monsters in general that inherently just sort of deal with your Noble Knight equipped with all the equips. For example, sometimes getting a 101 on board and just taking the big guy if you don't have the copy of Caliburn on it, or not Caliburn, that's Caliburn, Excalibur, my apologies. So just really good. The one copy of Guinevere is also the ratio that I played. I did, however, mess around with like 2 copies of this in the past, and that wasn't terrible either, but here we do see that they are also on the copy of the Black Launcelin, which you don't see as often, but it is kind of your extender in a sense, the same way that Gawain is, though Gawain has different summoning requirements, which I personally like this card, but I know some people aren't the biggest fans. Like, I've seen some people go as far as playing 3 of this, but 1 is a little less common, but it's definitely interesting. They are on the 1 copy of Brothers. This is a card that I personally never really liked, but over time I've started to actually enjoy 1 copy of it, so very nice to see that as well. And other than that, 2 copies of Maxx C as well. Again, just kind of going back to what we've been seeing, more decks actually choosing to go with like double copies of Maxx C in the main makes sense. In terms of the spells, we are seeing 2 copies of Lance. So this always has a very cool interaction with the Noble Knights, because you are able to lance your monster and still have equips on it, but the only thing is they won't gain the additional bonuses from those cards. So for example, something like a copy of Gallatin that would boost the attack, it can be equipped to, say, the Madrot, but if it gets lanced, it just won't have the bonus there. And in terms of the actual Noble Arm cards, the 1 copy of Arfaduder, 1 copy of Gallatin, or no, that's Gallatin, Caliburn, my apologies, the very confusing with some of these. 2 copies of Excalibur, 2 copies of Destiny, all of that is very standard. 2 copies of Duality. I believe the build that I put out a while back also was doing something similar. 1 copy of Rhoda. Triple copies of Soul Charge is something very different, as I don't necessarily feel like this is a Soul Charge deck, but I can also understand that if you pull off like your Madrot combo, for example, or even Brothers into like their Noble Knight, if your opponent is able to break it, usually it does take a lot of resources to get over one of the Noble Knight Xyz equipped with the right equips. So being able to just Soul Charge 2 back and make another one definitely sounds really, really strong. So I do like to see that. In terms of the trap cards, maining the 2 copies of Rivalry is always solid. The thing that can kind of mess up this deck in some cases is the fact that if you have a lot of equips on the field, it will take up a lot of your zones. So that's why I feel like a card like Breakthrough Skill that, as I mentioned, can kind of just deal with the problematic monsters, or even a Rivalry that just sort of sits there and allows you to break your opponent's board unintentionally, are all very good ideas for trap cards that this deck should be playing. So I do like to see that. In terms of the side deck, we do see more hand traps, 2 copies of Crow and the 3rd copy of Maxx C, as well as going second type of cards here, like the copies of Chalice. Also seeing Kaiser Coliseum in the side deck is really cool to see, as I feel like Noble Knight was always known for Kaiser Coliseum, but in more modern hat format, you don't really see it as much. I'd be curious to hear how that actually played out for them, given that, again, I just have an interesting love-hate relationship with this card for, you know, the fact that it's really good when you know you're going first, but really bad when you don't have it going first. Just a weird kind of card, but definitely a very powerful card when it works. 3 copies of MST in the side, again, just following that trend, and also seeing a copy of Arfaduder here in the side is definitely something I wouldn't have expected to be sided, but I guess it is a very good card into, again, some of these slower, grindier matchups. Given this card can just pop set cards, that means into your Geargia matchups or just any of your Like, for example, Geargia is a great example, actually, because it plays monsters that you would want to pop, as well, like that they would set, as well as just playing a lot of back row you want to deal with as well. And after that, also 3 copies of Decree, so another kind of floodgate that you just having 1 copy does a lot of work. Being able to stop cards from getting banished, so against ruler decks is really strong, as well as, say, against Spellbook, stopping the cards like Fate is really, really good. Looking at the extra deck, one thing I also wanted to mention is the copy of this guy that I'm forgetting his name. The Valor is a level 1 tuner, so it works really well with any of your Noble Knights. Being able to go into this guy and then be able to grab one of your Noble Arms from deck is really good. The other thing I'm seeing here is they are actually maxing out on the copies of the Sacred Noble Arms, or Sacred Noble Knight of King Artorgus, as well as the regular Artorgus, whereas a lot of other builds do play, usually I want to say like 2 and 2, give or take, but here they are maxing out on it, which could kind of go back to how I mentioned that they are choosing to play 3 copies of Soul Charge, so just making sure they always have copies of these available, especially when you can easily, you know, go through them quickly because of the rank up effect of the copies of Excalibur, so that could definitely be justified there. And overall, a very cool list. Again, really happy to see this player making all these moves with this deck, and hopefully we will see it winning some events soon enough. But anyways, guys, that is it for this video. You can let me know what you thought of this whole event and of these deck lists in the comment section down below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to go down to the video description and join the Hat Alliance Discord server if you want to play in events like these. Again, a lot of them are free to enter, and there's multiple that take place every single month, so definitely check it out. And anyways, guys, I will see you in the next video.